On this Wednesday night, the promise of more COVID-19 rapid tests.
And before Christmas, it was like the Hunger Games, trying to get a rapid test.
What the federal government says it will deliver to combat long lines and short supplies. Partying like there's no pandemic. The federal investigation into these Sunwing passengers and how will they get home? Kazakhstan's state of emergency. What's behind the violent protests and why the world is watching closely. And pontificating on parenthood.
There's a small irony about a man who's never had children telling people about having children.
The Pope takes aim at people who choose to have pets instead of children.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are midway into the first week of January 2022 and Canadians are again being told to be patient. Almost 2 years since the pandemic began, COVID case counts have reached record levels. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says it is understandable people are frustrated, especially at seeing surgeries postponed and having to endure more public health restrictions. He appealed to the unvaccinated to get their first shot.
They'd much rather be giving you an injection of vaccine than intubating you in an ICU.
Many Canadians aren't even able to get tested for COVID right now. The Prime Minister is promising 140 million rapid tests will be delivered to the provinces and territories by the end of the month. Our coverage tonight begins with Abigail Bimman.
2 hours.
2 hours, yeah.
Hoping that being here 2 hours in advance will give us that opportunity.
A cold wait for rapid tests in Toronto. And the supply ran dry in 20 minutes.
I've been lined up here in the cold for hours. I'm lining up actually for people who can't line up. They are seniors, they've got cancer. This is terrible.
Ottawa now promising 140 million more rapid tests will arrive this month.
One rapid test per week per person in Canada in January.
The Prime Minister acknowledged people are frustrated and tired, launching his first news conference of 2022 with lines you might remember from 2021 and 2020.
We have to hunker down, we have to pull together, and it gets better in a few months. We're looking at a better spring as long as we all keep doing our part.
January 2022 is not March 2020. We have made significant progress.
Of course, there are now vaccines and, for some, rapid tests. But with rollout up to the provinces, it's a patchwork. People in BC may envy those long Toronto lines since the general public can't yet easily access any.
What we've seen now in the last few months is the creation of, I'll call it an underground economy for rapid tests.
The co-chair of Canada's Testing Advisory Panel says 140 million more tests are a good start, but she'd like to see clarity and consistency across the board.
Families in provinces that have access to them are selling them to people in other provinces or sending them to family members in other provinces. We've heard about hoarding. We've heard about inequitable access to these tests.
Before Christmas, it was like the Hunger Games, trying to get a rapid test.
The Conservative leader said he's frustrated, accusing the Prime Minister of normalizing lockdowns and restrictions as the main tool to fight COVID. The Federal Advisory Panel called for the equitable use of rapid tests for screening a full year ago, January 2021. Donna?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thanks. Well, hospitalizations are beginning to rise. In Ontario, the system is under pressure. That province leads the country with more than 2,000 people in the hospital with COVID-19. 791 patients were admitted yesterday alone, and staffing levels are beginning to plummet as frontline workers test positive. A hospital in Fort Erie, Ontario, is temporarily shutting down because of a staffing shortage. The health authority says it's redeploying highly trained nurses and doctors to other emergency departments in the Niagara region. The new province-wide COVID-19 restrictions come into effect today and are aimed at easing the burden on hospitals. But as Mike Drolet reports, struggling businesses are being hit, and many are again desperate for help.
It's lonely today at Tom Vasilevsky's bar. There's no raising a pint here, or anywhere for that matter. Indeed, the only thing he's raising are the chairs, as government restrictions mandating the closure of indoor dining come into effect.
I don't know how many more times we can do this. I mean, we might have to eventually close down for a while and hopefully not lose our staff. And that's my biggest worry. These guys have been with me for 25 to 30 years. So they rely on me and I rely on them.
Tom, like so many other small business owners, had hoped they were in the clear. The vaccine passport system was supposed to allow them to keep the doors open. Instead, they're stuck in a financial Groundhog Day.
For the fourth time, we've had to lay off staff. People are losing their jobs once again.
The Canadian Federation of Independent Business predicted at the beginning of September that 1 in 6 owners wouldn't make it through the pandemic, a figure that will certainly worsen.
Now, with another round of lockdowns, though, I suspect many will be making the decision to throw in the towel. They just don't see a pathway back to profitability. And they're struggling, they're drowning with the debt that they've taken on.
The latest public health measures, which also includes capacity limits for retail and closures for concert venues and cinemas, will last through January 26th. An expanded rebate system announced by the Ontario government was widely panned by business owners, leading to a second announcement that a grant program is in the works.
I'm in a situation where I can somewhat sustain, but it is getting to a point where it's like, enough is enough. I'm frustrated, I'm angry, and I'm disappointed. I'm concerned. I don't usually lose sleep, but I'm wondering how I'm going to pay my staff.
Business owners say they'd like to believe the government that this lockdown will be short, but they've heard that before. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Winnipeg's police chief is declaring a rare state of emergency for the force itself. Staff levels are taking a big hit from COVID-19. There are at least 90 active cases among members now, and 170 other staff are off work for COVID-related reasons. The department is redeploying 80 people from other units to ensure that general patrols in the city continue. A group of Quebec social media influencers is stuck in Mexico, and there's not a lot of sympathy for them. They chartered a Sunwing flight to take them to Cancun to celebrate New Year's Eve. Images were posted online showing them breaking just about every rule in the book. And their return flight has now been canceled. As Mike Armstrong explains, no other airline wants to bring them home.
Bienvenue 111 private flight!
They got the party they were after, but the after party has been a problem. It was sold as a 6-night all-inclusive trip to Cancun. The advertising included the promise of a private plane with DJ. Organizers chartered a flight with the airline Sunwing, and it turned into basically a free-for-all. No masks, drinking out of bottles, vaping. It got so rowdy, there were reports the flight attendants had to hide in the back of the plane. These 3 passengers posted an apology on Instagram Wednesday, saying they didn't expect the flight to degenerate the way it did, that it was unacceptable, and that they weren't involved. Now, the group did make it to Cancun, but when videos started hitting social media, they hit the news, and Sunwing canceled the group's return flight, scheduled for Thursday. Global News has obtained an internal email the company sent to employees. It says it notified Transport Canada of the group's unruly behavior. Well, they weren't the only ones. The federal transport minister called for an investigation.
I'm extremely frustrated.
And Wednesday, the Prime Minister promised it will happen.
It's a slap in the face to see people putting themselves, putting their fellow citizens, putting airline workers at risk by being completely irresponsible.
The trip's organizer is James William Awad. Originally, in tweets that have now been deleted, he said the trip was a success. He's now saying he takes the matter very seriously and is rethinking what happened. Well, they're also having to rethink how to get home. Both Air Canada and Air Transat say they won't fly members of the group back to Canada. The other concern for the influencers on the flight is the damage to their reputations, self-inflicted.
The worst is that it's actually those people who actually put those images themselves on social media.
There is also another problem, potential penalties for their behavior. Transport Canada can fine people up to $5,000 for each offense. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Fully vaccinated travelers to England will no longer have to have a negative PCR test before arriving and won't have to self-isolate when they get there. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the measure came at a significant cost to the travel industry and says it's having little impact on the growth in cases.
From 4 a.m. on Friday, we will be scrapping the pre-departure test, which discourages many from travelling for fear of being trapped overseas and incurring significant extra expense. We will also be lifting the requirement to self-isolate on arrival until receipt of a negative PCR.
Incoming travelers will have to take a rapid test no later than 2 days after they arrive. Johnson says he's confident Britain can get through this latest wave without imposing any further measures, even though daily case counts there are breaking records and hospitalizations are now doubling every 9 days. The French president has taken a shot at the unvaccinated, saying he wants to put in place policies that will piss them off. In a newspaper interview, Emmanuel Macron used what's considered a vulgar term to describe how he wants to pressure the unvaccinated to get the shot. His comments dominated headlines as lawmakers debate a new vaccine passport. For months, France has asked people to show either proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test to access many public venues. Macron wants to remove the option to show a negative test, a similar approach other countries, including Canada, have taken. Over 20,000 people are hospitalized with COVID-19 in France. The appearance of tennis superstar Novak Djokovic at this month's Australian Open is in limbo. The world #1 ranked men's tennis player landed in Melbourne today, but there was a mistake with his visa application. Australia has since cancelled his visa and says he'll be deported. Djokovic is expected to challenge that decision. He had received a medical exemption to play in the tennis tournament, but he also needed to meet strict border rules to enter Australia. Djokovic has not said publicly if he is vaccinated. A deadly tragedy in Philadelphia coming up, the devastating fire that tore through a home. In Philadelphia, a fire has ripped through a public housing building. At least 13 people have been killed, including 7 children. The fire chief fears the death toll might rise as they search the debris. Firefighters say there were at least 4 smoke detectors in the building, but none of them went off.
This is, without a doubt, one of the most tragic days in our city's history. Loss of so many people in such a tragic way. Losing so many kids is just devastating.
Neighbors say they awoke to screams and flames. 26 people lived in the 2-unit row house. Well, tomorrow marks exactly 1 year since the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. was stormed by supporters of Donald Trump, an attempted insurrection intended to deny Joe Biden the presidency. The criminal investigation into who orchestrated the siege is the largest in FBI history. And today, the U.S. Attorney General vowed to bring all the perpetrators, not just the ones directly involved in the violence that day, to justice, promising to follow the facts wherever they lead. Jackson Prosco reports.
1 year later, the investigation into January 6th is growing deeper. More than 700 rioters have been arrested. 350 more are still wanted by the FBI, including the person who planted 2 bombs that day.
The Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6 perpetrators at any level accountable under law, whether they were present that day or were otherwise criminally responsible for the assault on our democracy.
The criminal investigation is paralleled by a political one that seeks to understand the role played by former President Donald Trump. During a Thursday speech from the Capitol, President Biden is expected to address the actions of his predecessor.
I would expect that President Biden will lay out the significance of what happened at the Capitol and the singular responsibility President Trump has for the chaos and carnage that we saw.
The January 6th committee has hinted it believes Trump had direct knowledge of plans to interrupt certification of Biden's victory and is now requesting an interview with Fox News host Sean Hannity. On December 31st, 2020, Hannity texted White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, "I do not see January 6th happening the way he is being told." On January 5th, he texted an unknown recipient, "I'm very worried about the next 48 hours.
What could have been done to better secure the Capitol
Trump's allies continue to deflect, pointing the blame at Capitol Police, who were overwhelmed by the mob. The new chief of police told a hearing his department is better prepared today.
We will be tested again, Senator. I mean, and I don't know who it's going to be or when it's going to be.
1 year after he urged his supporters to march on the Capitol, former President Trump is expected to stay entirely out of view. He canceled a planned press conference where he was expected to perpetuate the lie about a stolen election. Many Republicans worried about the message that would send on a day meant to commemorate the deadly attack on American democracy. Donna?
All right, Jackson in Washington, thanks. Turmoil in Kazakhstan. What's fueling the fierce public anger? Kazakhstan is not a country we report on very often, but there is upheaval going on there that the world is watching. There are violent public protests prompted by a sudden rise in fuel prices. A state of emergency has been declared nationwide. For some context, Kazakhstan is a former Soviet republic and is geographically huge, about the size of Western Europe. It sits between Russia and China and has a population of about 19 million. It's not a democracy and had the same president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, for almost 30 years until he unexpectedly retired in 2019. The country's current president has since reduced fuel prices, dismissed the government, and removed Nazarbayev from an important national security role. But as Redmond Shannon explains, it's unclear if that will restore calm.
This is Kazakhstan in chaos. Violent protests fueled by anger over the price of gas. At the start of the month, liquid petroleum costs doubled after the removal of a price cap. The fuel is used by many poorer Kazakhs to power their cars. But the demonstrations continued even after the cap was restored. Government buildings were set on fire Wednesday and some security force personnel were reportedly killed. As yet, there is no sign of a large police crackdown, but the internet has been cut off during the country's state of emergency, so much is uncertain. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev says financially motivated conspirators are behind the violence. He's the hand-picked successor of longtime authoritarian leader Nursultan Nazarbayev. Much of the anger this week is directed at the former dictator. Superficially, he's revered. The capital was renamed in his honour in 2019, and he remained in a key role as chair of the country's National Security Council. Tokayev took over the job Wednesday in another attempt to appease protesters. Experts say it's unlikely to be enough.
You have this country which is the size of Western Europe, but the political economy is only owned and controlled by 120 of these kind of elite families.
Analyst Kate Mallinson says she's seen a growing sense of injustice in Kazakhstan in recent years.
Because the Kazakh government have decimated effectively the systemic opposition in Kazakhstan, there is now this kind of uncontrollable, spontaneous sort of mass of protest.
Peacekeeping forces from former Soviet republics will now deploy to Kazakhstan to stabilize the situation. Russia, keen to see the status quo remain for a close ally with huge mineral reserves. Some Russian media outlets are already suggesting the crisis was stoked by Western powers, something the White House has denied. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, have you chosen pets instead of children? The Pope has some advice for you. Dogs have a whole lot of skills, but not every dog will save your life. A thankful hiker in Croatia discovered his would. 8-month-old North was hiking in the mountains last week when his owner fell and was unable to move. Fellow hikers left to get help, and North, an Alaskan Malamute, curled up on the injured man, keeping him warm for 13 hours. When rescuers arrived, they said it proves friendship between man and dog has no boundaries. Pope Francis had a different message today. In his audience at the Vatican, he said those who choose pets instead of children show a degree of selfishness, and that choice diminishes humanity. The decision to have kids, of course, is a complex topic, and as Eric Sorensen reports, the Pope's comments have really struck a chord.
There are adults with young children, and there are adults with pets and no children. Their lives are very different for many reasons, but Pope Francis has compared them, suggesting some non-parents are being, quote, selfish.
La paternità e la maternità.
This giving up on being a mother or father can take some of our humanity away from us.
The pontiff suggested some couples have pets instead of children.
But they might have 2 domestic animals, 2 dogs or cats.
I think that that's incredibly cruel and unfair.
Tanya Hale's organization focuses on parenthood. She says people have pets to love, but not instead of children for whom there are often bigger economic and other factors.
There's so many reasons that maybe someone does not want to bring a tiny human being into the world.
More adults are living without children. Among Canadian households, one-person homes and couples without children now represent more than half, 54%, outpacing households with kids. Statistics Canada found the growth rate for couples without children was up 7.2% over 5 years, while couples with children grew at just 2.3%. And it's true we are increasingly in love with our pets. Canada's dog population grew to 7.7 million in 2020, and there are even more cats, 8.1 million. But are the numbers of children and pets connected, as the Pope seems to suggest?
He's implied that it's because of pet ownership that parenthood rates are falling, and I'm not persuaded that the first causes the second.
Sociologist Susan Prentice suggests many parents now make informed decisions about parenthood, rather than the church making it for them.
It's a good thing when folks get to control their own fertility and make their own choices. The phenomenon of family policy and falling birth rates goes a lot further to explaining why fewer babies are being born than does pet ownership.
Bravo.
The Pope also emphasized the importance of adoption, and on that, Tanya Hales agrees.
There are tons of babies being born every day.
And whether there are family pets or not, there are children in the world waiting for a family to take care of them. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Peggy's Cove Lighthouse in Nova Scotia. Beautiful spot. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email your photo to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.